Hey, U.S. History 1, it's Mr. C. I think maybe we didn't get this recorded that I recorded last week, so I'm going to redo this and make sure that we've got the main ideas and things I think maybe we kind of missed based on the way that they turn their answers in for strategy. So, what we're trying to look at is how to use data and how to use both graphs and maps in order to figure things out. So, let's look at our next slide here. And what area was the south closest to the north? So, let's look at that right here. So we're looking at the difference between them. We want to see where the difference is the least. And what area was the area, meaning category, population, manufactured goods, exports. We're looking at this resources of the Union Confederacy. Which of these is the South, which is the Confederacy, is how I'm using it, black, closest to the Union, the North. So the Confederacy is the South. It's dark color, and the Union is the North. Those are interchangeable. The Yankees, the Union, and the North are all the same. The Rebels, the Confederacy, and the South all have the same meaning. In what category, in what area was the South closest to the North? That's going to be here, exports. What crop made that possible for the South to be so close? Well, it was white gold. It would be cotton. Because two-thirds of the cotton that was used in Britain and France came from the South, they were able to export that one crop and keep up with the North, even though you can see they have huge advantages every place else up here. In what area was the South the most behind the North? So we're going to find real far gaps. Here's a big one, and here's a big one. So this is from 92 to 8. That's manufactured goods. And this is from 94 to 6, iron production. So that's the answer, iron production. Name 3 important items in war this would impact. Iron, okay. Cannons, railroads, machinery for factories. Approximately how many times greater, how many times greater, read this, approximately how many times greater was northern manufacturing? So I'm going to look at manufacturing here. How many times? So it's not 92 minus 8, that's the difference. That's a math word, difference. How many times greater? Well, 8 times 10 is 80, so it's more than 10. 8 times 11 is 88, so it's a little bit more than that. 8 times 12 would be 96, so I take anything between 11 and 12, between 11 times greater or 12 times greater. Why was the South so far behind? Because we talked about this a couple chapters ago. The South didn't need to build factories. In fact, it could make more money off of cotton than it could off of manufactured goods. And since most Southerners only cared about immediately making money, even if they were destroying their own land, then they chose the route that was quicker money. And white gold, cotton, particularly in Mississippi, was faster than building a factory and hiring workers. Analyze/predict. Which area do you believe is the most critical for winning the war? There's several answers I would take here, as long as you think through it. If you're going to say that the war is about who loses the most casualties, maybe you would say population. You could say population is most important because there's a huge gap between the number of people in the North and the number of people available to fight in the South. You could talk about manufactured goods and say, well, you've got to manufacture a lot of things. You've got to make barrels to put food into to ship to the army. You have to make rifles. You have to make ammunition. You have to build wagons. You have to have harnesses for the horses for the wagons. Or any of those things. You could argue that. Like you could argue that iron production is affecting manufactured goods and the miles of railroad tracks. So maybe that huge gap is important. You could talk about this money. There's a huge money gap here. Wars cost huge amounts of money. We've talked about that. The French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, cost Great Britain so much money that it started to tax the colonies, and that led to the American Revolution. So wars cost money, and there's results for wars, just like this stimulus package that we're going through. It's trillions of dollars. It costs a lot of money, and it's going to have to be paid for. And it will not be people that are retiring right now. It'll be your generation that has to pay for the heavy, heavy cost of this war against the coronavirus. Right, next slide. Right, this is a map of railroads in the United States, and it's titled More Than Miles. So it's not merely that there's more railroad, but it has to do with what that represents. So what are two important resources for building railroads? Let's go back to the last slide. One of them is iron, and one of them is money, because you can't charge for riding a railroad until the line is completed. So it's not like you can open up a restaurant and then expand the restaurant as you get more customers. You can't have customers on a railroad until you've paid for the construction and the completion of the entire line. So this represents the North has way more iron, but it also has way more capital for them to have completed all these rail lines. Who were rivers more important to, North or the South? Well, the North had iron rivers, railroads. The South had far fewer railroads, and therefore its rivers, especially the Mississippi, were way more important. You can see that this is a key river, the Mississippi, and rivers, for example, in Alabama that led down to Apalachicola were also very important. One little note, this rail line right here, if you look carefully, that's leading from Montgomery, and it's going to, there we go, Atlanta. And that rail line was specifically built because Montgomery, before the war, was the largest slave trading city in the entire South. And so that was for the transport of human property, slaves, from this huge auction area that was in Montgomery to Alabama, where they could be shipped to other places. Okay. I answered why on that. Why? Because it has fewer railroads, and because the South still has to get its cotton out, it still has to get its exports out, and it's particularly necessary to get its imports in. Okay, final slide. Okay, we've seen this. If you answer the questions and Googled anything on the internet, you've seen this if you looked up Anaconda Plan. This is Scott's Great Snake. So first of all, we're reviewing. Who was General Winfield Scott? General Winfield Scott was the commander that was in charge of the U.S. expedition in the Mexican-American War. He came after Zachary Taylor. Taylor resigned because he wasn't given the job of taking on the rest of the campaign, and Winfield Scott was given that job instead by the president, and he captured Mexico City and became a great war hero. He fought in the War of 1812. He fought in the Mexican War. He had a lot of experience. But at the time of the Civil War, he was too old to get out from behind the desk. He had the mind, but he didn't have the body anymore. He said that the greatest officer that he saw in the Mexican-American War was Robert E. Lee, and that's why he recommended to Lincoln that Lee be asked to be the commander of all the Union forces. And we heard about that story, how because Virginia, his home, and specifically his home was inside of the U.S. Capitol, Arlington, which is today Arlington National Cemetery. When Virginia seceded, he felt he couldn't fight against his family and friends and neighbors, people he'd grown up and been a child with, and so he left and joined the Confederacy. What are the three strategies of war? So we've gone through this with each one of our wars, but we should think about this. The three strategies of war are attrition, ATTRITION, exhaustion, 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 and annihilation, ANNIHIALATION. Let's go through each of those. Attrition is like in bowling. When all the pins are down, then the war is over. So if you knock everything down, if you eliminate all the zombies, if you take out all the enemy, then you win by attrition. Exhaustion is when someone, the other side, just quits because they don't want to do it anymore. They're worn out. They may still have soldiers. They may still have a navy. They may still have money in the bank, but they just, inside, they're just done. They don't want to do it anymore. It's like a person who quits a team or quits a test before their time is up. They just don't want to try anymore. Exhaustion. And then annihilation is when you capture or destroy a key element that is necessary in order to keep fighting. So you surround and destroy the entire enemy army. Annihilation. You capture the enemy capital. Annihilation. You force the king to leave, or you capture the king or the queen. Annihilation. Why did Scott think that his plan would work? Well, he knew the South. He knew war. He knew the South was completely dependent on exports, which is why the South is always against tariffs. Let's remember, we're reviewing. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. Why is the South against taxes on imported goods? Because they import lots of goods. Because they export their cotton and then get a credit and then use that credit to pay for goods from England or France where they've sent their cotton. What was the weakness of the plan? Well, the weakness was this is a huge amount of area to have to use ships to blockade. A blockade is the use of naval forces, of Navy ships to prevent people moving in and coming out of a country with a coastline. Remember when the British did this, they only had to, and they had the world's greatest navy, they only had to cover this much from Georgia, and very few people actually lived there, all the way up here to New England. In the Anaconda plan, for it to work, he's got to use the Navy all the way around all of this. Around Florida, around here, there's down toward Mobile, around New Orleans, all the way down to the Texas coast. How did the plan become more effective? Well, as time went on, this line became shorter because as the United States captured ports like New Orleans or Mobile, then the snake didn't have to extend that far. They didn't have to protect against people sending supplies or trying to get supplies into or out of Mobile because Mobile was captured by the Union forces, by the North, by the Yankees. The same thing with New Orleans. When Vicksburg here on the Mississippi was captured, that was even less that they had to surround and try to squeeze. So as time went on, it became more effective. And finally, question number 12. This seems like a great plan. Why did Lincoln call for 75,000 volunteers in the spring of 1861 to attack Richmond, onward to Richmond? Why did he use this as his secondary strategy, not his main strategy? Well, because this by itself would not cause the South to completely collapse. They could begin to start manufacturing their own things. It would take a long time, and Lincoln was not a general. Winfield Scott had fought in the War of 1812. He'd fought in the Mexican War in the 1840s. He was still a general in the same army in 1861. Lincoln was a president. That meant that in less than 3 years, he would have to run again. If the war wasn't over and it wasn't going well, he might lose re-election and the war would be over. So he needed to do something that took less time, and so he went, instead of the strategy of, let's go back to number 8, exhaustion, just wearing out the South until they had no more will to fight, he went after annihilation. Let's send an army, capture the Confederate capital. It's less than 100 miles between the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., and the Confederate capital, Richmond. Let's get down there, capture it. That will end the war. I hope this has helped. And I hope that I'll be able to make some more videos. This, again, will be uploaded onto my YouTube channel. I'll make a link for you and send that out. Praying for you all. God bless you all. Have a great day.